The day I discovered my grandfather had been building precision instruments for a network that didn't officially exist, I was standing in a workshop hidden beneath an antique clock repair shop I'd inherited without understanding why. And the man stepping out of the shadows wasn't there to welcome me. He was there to make sure I never told anyone what I'd found. But 3 weeks earlier, none of that mattered yet. 3 weeks earlier, I was just Maren, 24 years old, sleeping on a friend's couch in Portland after my grandfather's funeral, holding the only thing my aunt hadn't tried to claim, his old work coat. The coat smelled like oil and wood shavings, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. My grandfather, Samuel Locke, had raised me after my parents died when I was 7. He'd taught me to read blueprints before I could do long division, showed me how to true a mechanism, how to listen to the sound a gear makes when it's perfectly balanced. And then he was gone. Heart attack at 73, alone in his apartment while my Aunt Linda circled like a vulture, cataloging his belongings before his body was even cold. She got the furniture, the savings account, the car. I got the coat because she thought it was worthless. I found the journal by accident, running my hand along the lining while curled up on that couch at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep. My fingers caught on something stiff sewn into the inner pocket, hidden so carefully I never would have noticed if I hadn't been searching for comfort in fabric that still smelled like him. The stitching was tight, deliberate. I used a small knife to carefully open it. The journal was maybe 4 inches by 6, bound in dark leather, the pages dense with my grandfather's precise handwriting. Dates going back 40 years. Diagrams, measurements, and names I didn't recognize followed by alphanumeric codes that looked almost military. On the first page, in slightly shaky handwriting that must have been recent, he'd written, "Maren, if you're reading this, I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. The shop is yours. The key is in the workbench. Trust no one from the network until you understand what we built." My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Detailed sketches of instruments I'd never seen before. Chronometers with modifications I didn't understand. Navigation tools with components that seemed impossible. And scattered throughout, references to something called the Continuity Network. The last entry was dated 2 days before he died. Final commission complete. Delivered to Oslo Contact. Maren has the skills, but not the knowledge yet. If something happens to me, she inherits the shop. Linda must not know what it really is. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. The shop. He'd owned a small clock repair business in a town called Millbrook, about 90 miles from Portland. I'd visited it as a kid, remembered the dusty front room with its rows of antique timepieces, the work tables in back, where he'd let me help with simple repairs. But he'd sold it years ago. Well, that's what he told me. I grabbed my phone and searched the address I remembered. Locke & Son Timepieces. Still listed. Still there. The next morning, I drove to Millbrook with the journal tucked inside my jacket and every dollar I had left in the world, $73, in my pocket. The town looked smaller than I remembered, the main street tired and faded, half the storefronts empty. But the clock shop stood exactly as it had been, wedged between a closed insurance office and a faded barber shop, the painted signs still legible above the door. The windows were dusty but intact. A closed sign hung crookedly inside. I tried the front door. Locked. According to the journal, there was a key in the workbench, which meant I needed to get inside first. I walked around back, down a narrow alley that smelled like old rain and rust, and found a rear entrance. The lock was old, simple. I felt a pang of guilt as I used a bent piece of wire from my car to work it open, but my grandfather had left this place to me, even if there was no official paperwork yet. The lock clicked. I stepped inside. The back room was exactly as I remembered it. 2 long workbenches cluttered with tools, a wall of tiny drawers labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Afternoon light filtering through dirty windows. Everything covered in a thin layer of dust, like the place had been frozen in time. I moved to the main workbench and started searching. Drawers. Cubbies. Nothing. Then I noticed the bench itself, the way one section of the surface sat slightly lower than the rest, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it. I pressed down on it. Nothing. Pressed the opposite corner. A soft click echoed through the quiet shop. A hidden drawer slid open beneath the bench top. Inside was a single iron key, heavy and old, attached to a small tag with an address written in faded ink. Basement access, north wall. I looked around the shop slowly. I'd never known there was a basement. I found the access panel behind a tall cabinet filled with clock parts. It took me 20 minutes to move it, and when I finally did, I saw the outline of a door cut into the wall, nearly invisible under years of paint. The key slid in smoothly. Too smoothly for something that hadn't been used in years. I pulled the door open and stared down into darkness, a set of wooden stairs descending into a space that smelled like metal and electricity. And as I took my first step down, a voice spoke from the shadows below. "You shouldn't have come here." I froze on the stairs, my hand gripping the railing so hard my knuckles went white. The voice was male, calm, and far too steady for someone who'd just been hiding in a basement. "Who are you?" I managed to say, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. A light clicked on below, sudden and bright, making me squint. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a man standing at the bottom of the stairs, maybe mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a wool coat and wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't look threatening exactly, but he didn't look friendly either. "My name is Peter Carver," he said. "I worked with your grandfather for 26 years. And you need to leave before someone else realizes you're here." My heart was pounding, but something in the way he said it, "worked with, not for," made me hold my ground. "He left this place to me." "I know." Peter's expression softened slightly. "He told me he would. But he also made me promise to keep you away from it until you were ready." "Ready for what?" He gestured down the stairs. "Come see. But quickly. And lock the door behind you." Every instinct I had screamed that this was a terrible idea. But I thought about the journal, about my grandfather's careful handwriting, about the phrase "trust no one from the network until you understand what we built." I descended the stairs and pulled the door shut behind me, hearing the lock click into place. The space below wasn't a basement. It was a workshop, larger than the shop above, the walls lined with equipment I'd never seen outside of university engineering labs. Precision lathes, measurement instruments, rows of tools arranged with obsessive care. And on every available surface, devices in various stages of completion, chronometers, compasses, sextants, things I couldn't even name. "What is this?" I whispered. Peter moved to one of the workbenches and picked up a brass chronometer, its face gleaming under the workshop lights. "Your grandfather was one of 12 master timekeepers in the continuity network. We build instruments for people who need precision that can't be traced, that can't be monitored, that doesn't rely on satellites or digital systems that can be hacked or shut down." I stared at him. "You're saying he built tools for spies?" "Sometimes. Also for journalists in dangerous countries, researchers in remote locations, maritime navigators who don't trust GPS, people who need to operate independently of systems that can be compromised." He set the chronometer down carefully. "We don't ask what they're used for. We just build them to specifications that haven't been possible since before World War II, and we do it quietly." My mind was racing. Why the secrecy? Because the moment someone knows this network exists, it becomes a target. Governments who want control over it, corporations who want to buy it, people who want to destroy it. He looked at me steadily. "Your grandfather protected this for 40 years, and now that responsibility falls to you." "I don't understand." "Why me?" Peter moved to a drawer and pulled out a folder, handing it to me. Inside were documents, property deeds, business registrations, all in my grandfather's name, all dated within the last year. And paper-clipped to the front was a handwritten note. I recognized the shaky writing immediately. "Maren has the hands and the mind. She just needs to believe she can do it. Trust Peter. He'll teach her the rest." My eyes burned. I looked up at Peter. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "You don't." He gestured to the workshop around us. "But your grandfather spent the last 6 months of his life making sure you'd inherit this intact. He updated all the legal documents. He moved his active commissions to other timekeepers. He even convinced your aunt the shop had been sold years ago by creating false sale records." He paused. "The only thing he couldn't do was tell you directly. Because he knew if Linda suspected this place had value, she'd fight you for it." That landed hard, because it was exactly something Linda would do. I walked slowly through the workshop, running my fingers along the tools, the workbenches, feeling the weight of it all. "How much is this worth?" "Money." Peter shook his head. "The equipment, maybe 50,000. But what we build here, a single chronometer can sell for $30,000. A complete navigation set, 200,000. Your grandfather completed maybe 4 to 6 commissions a year." He met my eyes. He lived simply because he didn't want anyone asking questions. But he died with over $800,000 in accounts your aunt doesn't know about. I felt dizzy. $800,000. While I'd been sleeping on a couch, scraping together gas money. Why didn't he tell me? My voice cracked. Why did he let me think I had nothing? Peter's expression gentled. Because he was protecting you. If Linda knew you had access to this, she'd find a way to take it. This way, as far as she knows, you inherited a worthless closed shop. By the time she realizes otherwise, the legal documents will be airtight. He moved to another workbench and carefully lifted a half-completed instrument, something intricate with brass gears and a crystal face. Your grandfather's last commission. A maritime chronometer for a contact in Oslo. It was supposed to be delivered 2 weeks ago, but he died before he could finish it. Oslo, I said quietly. That was in the journal. Peter nodded. The client is getting impatient. And if we don't deliver, the network starts asking questions about succession, about whether Samuel's workshop can be trusted anymore. He looked at me directly. I can finish it. But according to network protocol, the inheritor has to make the delivery. It's how we verify the transition is legitimate. My stomach tightened. You want me to go to Norway? I want you to understand what you've inherited before you make any decisions. He set the chronometer down carefully. Take a few days. Learn the workshop. Look through his records. Then decide if you want this life. I stood there in the hidden workshop beneath the shop my grandfather had supposedly sold, surrounded by tools and secrets and a legacy I hadn't known existed, and felt the weight of it settle onto my shoulders. But underneath the fear, underneath the uncertainty, something else stirred. Something that felt like purpose. Teach me, I said. For 3 days, I'd barely left the workshop. Peter taught me during the hours when Millbrook's main street was quietest, showing me techniques my grandfather had refined over decades. How to calibrate a chronometer to accuracy within 1 second per month. How to seal a mechanism against salt, water, and temperature extremes. How to encode a maker's mark so subtle only another timekeeper would recognize it. And slowly, I began to understand what my grandfather had built. Not just instruments, but a kind of independence. A way for people to navigate, to measure, to trust their tools when they couldn't trust anything else. On the 4th day, Peter handed me a wooden case lined with velvet. Inside sat the completed chronometer, its brass surface catching the light. Oslo, he said simply. The contact's name is Halvorsen. He'll meet you at a cafe called Kaffebrenneriet on Akersgata. 2 p.m., 5 days from now. My hands shook slightly as I took the case. What if something goes wrong? Then you walk away. Leave the chronometer, leave Oslo, come back here and decide if you want to sell everything. Peter's expression was serious. But if you complete the delivery, you'll become part of the network officially. And there's no stepping back from that. I thought about my Aunt Linda, about the couch I'd been sleeping on, about the months of feeling like I was disappearing into nothing. I'll do it, I said. The flight to Oslo was the longest 8 hours of my life. I kept the chronometer in my carry-on, afraid to let it out of my sight, reading and rereading my grandfather's journal entries about previous deliveries. He made it sound almost mundane. Meet the contact, verify the specifications, receive payment, leave. But underneath every entry, I sensed caution, the awareness that one wrong move could expose everything. Kaffebrenneriet was a small corner cafe with large windows and the smell of dark roasted coffee. I arrived 20 minutes early, ordered tea I didn't drink, and waited. At exactly 2 p.m., a man in his 60s sat down across from me. He had a weathered face and steady hands, the look of someone who'd spent years at sea. You're not Samuel, he said in lightly accented English. I'm his granddaughter, Maren Locke. His expression shifted, something that might have been sadness crossing his features. I heard he passed. I'm sorry. He was a craftsman of the old kind. He finished your commission before he died, I said quietly, sliding the case across the table. I completed the final calibrations. Halvorsen opened the case carefully, his eyes moving over the chronometer with practiced assessment. He lifted it, turned it, checked the seals, opened the back to examine the mechanism. The inspection felt like it lasted forever. Finally, he closed the case and nodded. It's perfect. Your grandfather taught you well. He did, I said, and meant it. Halvorsen reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table. 30,000 as agreed. And a message from the network. If you wish to continue your grandfather's work, you'll be welcomed. If not, This transaction closes his account with honor. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. $30,000. For one instrument. For work my hands had helped complete in a hidden workshop most people would never know existed. I'll continue, I said. Something that might have been approval flickered in Halverson's expression. Then the network welcomed Samuel Locke's successor. He stood, shook my hand once, firmly, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. I sat there for a long moment, the envelope in my hands, feeling the full weight of what I'd just committed to. Then I smiled. When I returned to Millbrook, Peter was waiting in the workshop. I showed him the empty case, and he nodded once, satisfied. Your grandfather would be proud, he said simply. Over the following weeks, I learned the truth of what I'd inherited. Not just a workshop, but accounts in 3 countries containing the money my grandfather had carefully saved. Not just tools, but contacts across the network who began sending commission requests once they knew Samuel's workshop was active again. And I learned that I wasn't alone. Peter introduced me to 2 other timekeepers in the region, men and women who'd worked alongside my grandfather for years, who welcomed me not because of my name, but because I proved I could do the work. I moved into the apartment above the shop, the one my grandfather had kept but never mentioned. I filed the legal documents that made everything official, and when my Aunt Linda finally came sniffing around asking why I'd bothered keeping that worthless shop, I just smiled and told her I was opening a small repair business. She lost interest immediately. 6 months after finding the journal, I completed my 5th commission, a navigation set for a researcher heading to Antarctica. The payment was enough to fully establish myself, to stop worrying about money, to finally breathe. But more than that, I had purpose. I had a place I belonged. I had work that mattered in ways I was only beginning to understand. One evening, I sat at my grandfather's workbench, my workbench now, with his journal open beside me. I'd added my own entries, documenting commissions, refining techniques, continuing the record he'd kept for 40 years. And on the last page he'd written on, I added a single line in my own careful handwriting. Thank you for believing I could do this. I won't let you down. The workshop hummed quietly around me, tools in their places, mechanisms in progress, the legacy he'd built now living on in my hands. I wasn't the lost girl sleeping on a couch anymore. I was a timekeeper. I was his granddaughter in every way that mattered. And I was exactly where I was meant to be.